Chapter 7, in which we discover a little of what lies beneath Mirenberg's surface. A dangerous farce. Lucifer's name taken in vain. Conversation regarding the Antichrist. A supposed acquaintance of my family. An invitation to dine in hell. I accept. With so few clothes upon our backs, we were indeed near to freezing by the time the van passed into what, by the echo, was a courtyard. A gate was locked shut behind us, and we heard whispers in the darkness outside. "This stink is dreadful," complained St. Audrin. "Do they mean to stifle us to death?" Almost as if we had been overheard, the doors of the charnel wagon were opened, and we gasped gratefully at the purer air. 3 men entered the van. 2 held pistols at our temples, while the third tied our hands behind our backs and blindfolded us, for all the world as if we were prisoners on our way to execution. Perhaps, thought I, Monsorbier had prepared this death. Did he possess his own guillotine? Might he not, in his fury, believe that I must not cheat the machine? But why manifest his vengeance on poor St. Audrin, who had given him no offence save in the bearing of a title and an aristocratic lisp, albeit both recently acquired? Now we stumbled, boots upon rough paving, from van to doorway and into somewhat warmer air, though damp, down steps on which we slipped, grunting and falling, shoulder against shoulder, no longer caring to protest since we had no answers as yet, and would possibly never have any until we were finally in hell. Down still further echoed drops of water from high vault to flooded floor, and further, natural rock, stalactites and fungus, the sound of viscous liquid, and a stink as if a sewer emptied nearby. "Cover my nose and not my eyes, I beg thee, gentlemen," said St. Audrin desperately, perhaps by way of a joke. The rufflers pushed us on, sliding and staggering, down another level at least. Could there be anything below the very sewers? Were these Svetavian catacombs, where Christians hid from pagans, and then vice versa? Where Ritter Igor von Miroff slept awake, if his name city were ever subjected to the rule of tyranny? I'd once thought these caverns fanciful legend, borrowed from Rome or Constantinople, but here they were for certain, and I told myself that no one could mean to kill us out of hand, or we should have been dead by now. Such white thuggies as these are too lazy for overmuch caution or for considered finesse. I had become almost hot. I felt, in fact, a fire's heat on my face, sensed a flickering brand. Footsteps retreated. A door was closed. There was the smell of sulphur in the air, a stink more reminiscent of chemicals and retorts. Could it be he who had written us the note about the inflammable gas? A benefactor with a savage's sense of humour? We were pushed by invisible, insistent hands back until we reached a wall. The stones were smooth. Something snapped around my ankle, and chain was slithering now. We were manacled. The blindfolds were taken away from our eyes, but the bonds remained. I could see only glaring flame, then red baskets of coals swinging from the roof, then a huge bloated face. And the whole charade was suddenly explained. We were surrounded by the banalities of a theatrical stage, the kind of scene one finds everywhere in the modern playhouse, where a multiplicity of mechanical devices is used to affect the public sensibility, to make folk swoon with terror for want of being moved by poetry of honest drama. Here was the setting for a Satanist coven, if ever I'd seen one, and sure enough, the men and women who stood in the shadows of this grotto were clad in monastic habits, cowled and masked. I was convinced now that this was not of Monsorbier's engineering. From behind the great goat-faced screen came a diminutive red-robed abbot with splayed feet. He spoke in that sing-song all such people prefer to substitute for ordinary speech, archaic and somewhat immoderate in its use of adjectives. Out it rushed as if a suddenly unblocked privy. "Wretched, reckless, rebellious rogues, you dared reject the warnings of our malevolent king, and now you must suffer our ruthless revenge. Horrid wriggling worms, your heresies make you hateful in the eyes of hell and her unholy host." All this affected by the speaker's difficulty in pronouncing the letter R and substituting for it the familiar W. "How plead you in your perversity? Can you reasonably claim your crimes have not made you wipe for Lucifer's righteous revenge?" "Gad," said St. Audrin, still in English, "a worse fate than this is impossible to imagine, Von Beck. We've fallen into the clutches of a demented juvenile with a penchant for poor alliteration. You and I shall discover no wit here, I fear." "You'll speak in a civilized tongue, sir," squeaked our captor, "or suffer to have it removed completely." I recognised the speaker. I had met him before, at our Landgräfin's. It was her devil-dabbling nephew who had so resented the largesse she had thrown our way. Doubtless he was already counting his inheritance. "My dear Baron," said I, "'tis easy to tell you're piqued because your aunt favours our enterprise over your expectations. But don't you think even your friends here would agree your reaction's a touch exaggerated?" "Mock not this terrible tribunal, lest ye be judged instantly and condemned with neither indictment nor defence. We have gathered, miserable man, to try out in the matter of your disobedience to the dictates of our sinister master, lord of the infernal realms, ruler of rulers, commander of the infinite legions of the damned, his most satanic majesty, Prince Lucifer. You defy the dictates of hell by intruding into that disputed territory of the upper air, the realm already claimed by our master, to which man is forbidden. That the arch-usurper Jehovah already claims this region as his own is well known, but that man should interject their prideful designs into that dispute is unacceptable either to hell or to heaven, for the war is soon to be fought that shall decide the struggle. The stars conjoin." St. Audrin raised a well-trimmed eyebrow. "Why, I must congratulate you, Herr Baron, on your most splendidly elaborate disguise." He spoke bravely enough, but I must say I find your speech a trifle confusing. His words came out a touch blurred with a tremble to them. He knew as well as I that we were in the hands of a small-minded degenerate. This Baron sought only the mildest excuse to commit the most hideous acts of torture and murder. There was no appeal to such as him, as I'd already found in France. One's only appeal would be to God, and God had long since been abolished from my universe. St. Audrin, however, would call on any aid, whether he believed in its existence or not. He there and then flung back his head to shout, "O my patron! O Lucifer, Prince of the Morning! Make these ignorant people aware of whom they persecute!" Well, the Baron was baffled for a second by that. He hesitated. He cleared his throat. There came a murmuring from the congregation. How many used their Satanism to release their carnal lusts? How many at least partially believed in the power of Lucifer? How many were faithful converts to his cause? Well, I did not know, but St. Audrin had found our only argument, and again I was impressed by the facility, if not the morality, of his wits. "Lucifer, hear me!" bellowed the clever Scot. "Your name is used in vain, master, and turned upon your son." The red robe made an agitated, flat-footed swirl to address the throng. "He lies. He's no adept." "Adept," says St. Audrin, gathering into momentum and pushing forward his small gain. "True, I'm no adept. I am Thog Magog, Count of the fiery pit, and Lucifer is my father. I am his emissary upon earth, the sole vessel of his power and wisdom. I shall be called the Beast." He had his audience captured, whispering amongst themselves while our Baron is trapped midway, a rogue sphere between sun and earth. "Now do you know me, foolish dabblers?" St. Audrin bellowed. "Now do you know me?" The echoes of the catacombs amplified his voice. He had their properties finely judged. His skills of play acting were being fully utilised. Even I might have believed him the son of Lucifer. "Release me!" "Aye, release him!" cried one of the cowled fraternity. "Charlatan!" shouted St. Audrin. "Villain! 'Tis you, sir, who's the heretic. I am come here to reveal the truth to you all. This body is sacred. If you slay it, you release in me all my vengeful glory. Hell shall visit earth in all its howling horror. You rob yourselves of privilege and bring upon yourselves my father's wrath." The little Baron, von Bresenvorts is his name, attempted to hold them back, squeaking at them in most undignified manner. "He's not the beast, I assure you. He is not the beast." "I am the beast and the lord of the city of the world. I am the avenger. I am the fire that shall lay waste all that man treasures. I am the sword which shall execute my fated task. I am the scythe." "You are an impostor!" shrieked the Baron. "You deceived my aunt, and now you seek to deceive my followers. You shall be doubly punished." "No, sir, 'tis you who will be doomed." I broke in now with the voice of one used to rally frightened troops. "Hear me, people. This is Thog Magog. I swear upon my soul. He allowed himself to be brought here so that he might address you. Kill him and you shall be forever damned, for he is the one destined to be the Antichrist." I babbled such nonsense, seeing no harm in taking our claims a step or two further. "You lie so," said the furious miniature Baron. "This is the Chevalier St. Audwin, charlatan and trickster, a thief who condemned to death in England, exiled from Berlin, wanted as an outlaw in Vienna, and you, sir, are the son of a Graf von Beck, who renounced your title and inheritance to follow the kingslayers of France." At this, a thin man stepped into the firelight. He was tall, gaunt, his face more nearly a fleshless skull than any I had ever seen. He was dressed in black like a Quaker, and had a Quaker's wide-brimmed hat upon his grey locks. He had no age, this man, but he had burning, tormented eyes which had witnessed everything, from the world's creation, perhaps, to its end. The white lace at collar and wrist, at knee and ankle, was emphasis for his bloodless face. "You cannot be the Antichrist," he said reasonably to St. Audrin, "for the Antichrist is already chosen and shall soon begin to reign." I was inclined to believe that sonorous skeleton. He had more authority than any I had heard in all my life before. His voice was as old as time, and though empty of all feeling, it was weighted with a terrible wisdom. He wore no masquerader's weeds. His clothes were his own, severe and familiar to him. He and they were of a single piece. And all the while I regarded him, there was some kind of recognition stirring in me, as if he was the creature of my deepest dreams, taking flesh before my eyes. "You claim knowledge of us, sir," I said, "but we do not know you." I know you, von Beck. I know all your ancestors. First there was Ulrich, the cause of my great distress more than 100 years past. I knew him very well. Surely your family's archives take note of me." The Baron was defeated and lost. This man was his superior, and was acknowledged as such by all present. "You must tell me a name, sir, before I can answer that. Who are you, sir?" "I was once what St. Audrin claims to be. Do your histories record me?" He seemed almost anxious on the matter. "I am Klosterheim, who turned against his powerful master." "Do they speak of Klosterheim, who almost held the Grail?" "That is who I am, sir." "Do they recall me as evil personified, von Beck? Do they make a story of me to frighten children around the fireside?" "I am Klosterheim, and now I'm opposed to God and Satan both. Now I serve mankind." I am known as the ambassador of the stolen future and the unremembered past. Did the tales of Klosterheim chill your boyhood nights, von Beck? With every question, he took another pace towards me. St. Audrin, pale and puzzled, looked from his face to mine, from mine to his. I was not facetious when I replied, for my legs were weak and I was sweating. I've never heard of you, sir. Read nothing of a Klosterheim. Is there no book which calls me Satan's steward? Nothing at all in the libraries of Beck? Well, nothing, sir, that I know. His eyes grew almost sad. So my name is gone too from the world, he said. Too much is fading. He looked at me with a momentary expression of agony. I've much hatred for the name von Beck. I cannot be satisfied by killing you. Moreover, our destinies are too tangled even now. What's more, I lack courage for it. Do you know what damnation can be, sir? It can be a state of permanent caution, making one chronically unable to risk anything, even a risk which might save one from extinction. Not that extinction would be unwelcome, I suppose. He spread his white hands before him and stared at them. I hate you, von Beck. Musingly, and to my utter horror, he reached to stroke my cheek with his dead, thin fingers. Yet I suppose I must love you too. At least you have a meaning for me. I wonder now if your ancestor and I were not unconscious allies, part of the same design. Would you be my ally, von Beck? Would you love me? I turned my head. Sir, I said through clenched teeth, you terrify me and I dislike the sensation. What do you want of me? He seemed puzzled and dropped his hand. Well, nothing is yet. Von Bressenvorts is adult. I lodge in these catacombs. I have lived in them for more than 50 years. Do you believe me? You're mighty well preserved, sir. The air down here might be conducive to immortality. It is, he answered without humour, choosing his next words with slow care. The Graf Ulrich von Beck robbed me of my birthright. He accepted a commission in Lucifer's service. It came to me that this poor creature was mad. Sir, I've heard nothing of this. He was disbelieving. Nor of the Grail which Ulrich brought to Satan. I beg you, Herr Klosterheim, let us go. We offer you no harm. I serve mankind, he said. There'll be no wanton murder, because a little popinjay of a baron feels out of sorts. He has misused his power. Klosterheim's voice was a frozen whisper. I serve mankind now, he said again. Do you believe that? Sir, I believe, said I, humouring him any way he wished. But as for the rest concerning my ancestor, I regret I did not see him die. Do you know, young man, how von Beck's soul sought its reward? Once more I was urgently sincere. I know nothing of any of that. My ancestor died a natural death, I believe. He nodded slowly. Klosterheim was mad, but in a far grander and more impressive way than anyone else in those vaults. Will you dine with me? He whispered then, without waiting for my answer. He turned and glared at the others. Bring a key, you vermin. My master tolerates stupidity only in the humble. You are too proud, all of you. Kneel, everyone save he who has the key. And they fell at once to the rocky floor as though a single creature. Thus Klosterheim demonstrated his power to me, while a female in a white robe which split to show scabrous naked flesh turned open first one padlock and then the next, and a knife parted our bonds. Well, von Beck, will you dine? Did I imagine a hint of some terrible yearning? Did he trick me towards my death or some worse enslavement? And what of my friend, I asked. What of St. Audrin? He can go free at once. He raised his voice to address his near-listening servants. See that the Chevalier is taken back to his lodgings. He put a cold hand on my arm. Dine with me before you leave. I was devilish afraid of the man, yet I was curious. I know not why, and I almost felt sympathy for him. I hesitated. Sir, I must rest tonight, for I have a duel to fight at dawn. He turned away with such a hopeless sigh I found my mouth moving before my brain. Very well, Herr Klosterheim. I accept your invitation." "I am obliged." He strode to where the red robe made obeisance. He lifted up the trembling chin with the sharp toe of his boot. "You shall never act again without my express instructions. You are vain and foolish. You do not deserve the power I allow you. One more transgression and I shall take you," he points with his thumb, "down there." Von Bresenvortz attempted to beg forgiveness, but he was gagging on his own bile. Klosterheim dropped the chin. "Farewell, Monsieur le Chevalier. Be assured the Ritter von Beck shall follow in due course." St. Audrin made to resist this plan, but I raised my hand to show that I was satisfied of my safety. With a murmured farewell, I followed Klosterheim past the goat-head screen and into the narrow passage illuminated by brands giving off unusual silvery light. "Those men and women wait the coming of the Antichrist," said Klosterheim without looking back. "They know the birth, the place, the time. They believe they will be chosen for positions of power when the Antichrist's rule begins. They're a large and common herd. Each carries the mark of a pagan godling branded upon its rump and believes it's thus especially favoured. They're of use to the Antichrist, I suppose, but they are ignorant and poor company. No more than field beasts, do you see?" His confidences were unwelcome to me. We turned down a short flight of steps and into a large stone chamber, lit by more of the silvery flambeau. Here was a Spartan room furnished with desk, 2 chairs, a table, and a few old volumes and parchments, together with a steel globe. A chest of drawers stood against one wall, near a truckle bed. There was no heat. Klosterheim crossed to the chest, and from it removed a dish containing some white bread and 2 good-sized cheeses. On the dish he placed a knife. He poured water into 2 glass goblets, and his meal was ready. As he drew the chairs to the table, he removed his hat, gesturing for me to sit. He looked curiously at my face, pushing cheese and bread toward me in an awkward movement. He seemed to think me an animal whose behaviour he could not fathom. I cut a piece of cheese, took a goblet of water, and waited until he had served his own miserly portion. He was looking beyond me as he chewed. His eyes appeared to follow the movements of invisible armies, and I was tempted to glance over my shoulder in case I should see what he saw. As he watched this illusory panorama, he said to me, "Some 150 years ago you and I sought the same thing." I cleared my mouth. "Not I, sir." It was as if I split unnecessary hairs. "Oh, your ancestor, then. The same blood, same name. We sought the Holy Grail. Are you aware the Antichrist waits only possession of the Grail before beginning to rule?" Well, the man was crazier than I had originally suspected. "No, sir," said I. "I thought the Antichrist a faded fashion. The Grail was once given into the hands of my master, as he was then by your ancestor. Thus I was condemned to this existence. It came, the Grail, from the forest at the edge of heaven in the Middle Marches. However, as you must know, the geography of the Middle March is ever unstable. Now the forest can no longer be found. My master sought to placate God and offer the Grail to mankind as the sign of his good faith. But the Grail is itself. It vanished once the gesture was made by the master. It is lost to us. But you could find it again, von Beck." I did not intend to deny anything or make any gesture which might anger the madman. I let silence be my agreement. "You think the Grail's still in the Mittelmarch? You think the Grail's still in the Mittelmarch, Herr Klosterheim? Surely that's a place of damned souls, not holy cups." Klosterheim frowned. "So it was, but now because of the truce between God and Satan there are no damned souls. We live in an age, sir, where sin has no consequence. Do you find that heartening news, you who sought to create paradise in Paris?" "I do not." "Well, we're agreed on that." He cut carefully at his morsel of cheese, but did not eat it. So you serve the Antichrist, eh, Herr Klosterheim? Thus I must take it that Lucifer's your master still." "I did not say so, sir. The Antichrist is neither God nor Satan. The Antichrist would rule the territory they've renounced, as would I. Our interests are therefore the same. Is there a record in your family concerning the Grail's present location?" "Well, I have some vague idea of that. I wish to learn more, and so did not want him to think me ignorant or inclined to contradict his fantasies." "Vague? It is common knowledge in occult circles that the chief purpose of your aerial expedition is to retrieve the Grail." I was greatly surprised to be told so certainly of my plans, yet again I held my tongue. "How did they guess?" I asked. "Your name, sir, of course." "Is it so famous?" "The family legend. Those who concern themselves with things mystical and supernatural say you also possess the Paracelsian sword." "Indeed, sir." "Whoever had possession of these two objects of power, both the cup and the blade, would rule earth and challenge the authority of heaven." Klosterheim pushed away his goblet. "My hatred for you is profound, Von Beck, though you offer me no direct harm. But you exist because my enemy, Ulrich von Beck, succeeded over me." He looked beyond my shoulder again. I shivered and refused to follow his cold glare. "But perhaps you're not so casually acquainted with a hatred as constant and as intense as mine, eh, sir?" "I think not, sir." He frowned, returning his gaze to the table. He spoke almost to himself. "I am divorced from so much." He drew a deeper breath and looked at me directly again. "Well, sir?" "Well, what, sir?" I did not know what he expected of me. "Will you join the quest, sir? Or rather, will you allow me to accompany you on your own expedition?" "And have you kill me at the end?" I would not otherwise dissuade him from his misunderstanding. We could lose nothing by it, I reasoned. It seemed everyone but myself and St. Audrin had absolute faith in the reality of our fraud. Klosterheim was astonished. "Why kill you, sir?" "Well, your hatred, sir, the hatred you recently mentioned." He shrugged, close to amusement, or whatever resembled that emotion in his cold, miserable heart. "What use would be served by killing you, sir? Death is nothing. That which follows death is of some importance, however. Do you take me for a petty revenger?" He spoke distantly, his voice fading like ice turning to vapour. Again his eyes followed invisible dramas. "Well, sir, will you make a bargain with Klosterheim? I'll guide you through the Mittelmarch and can rally aid of several kinds. Then we take an equal share of all that's gained." "I'm a little unsure of what you're offering me, sir." "Wisdom. Guidance. You have not journeyed there before, I know. All manner of intelligence, and of course ultimately true power. Greater power than ever before. A territory upon our earth wherein you may work any experiment you wish. Your disappointments in France could be rectified if that was what you still dreamed of." "It's an attractive prospect, sir," said I, becoming somewhat light-hearted as the fantasy grew out of all sane proportions. "But I fear I lack the other object of power mentioned. What's this sword?" "The sword of Paracelsus. I respect your discretion." He shook his head. "It's safest wherever you keep it now. The greatest danger will be in the subsequent struggle, and that could be easily fought in this realm." I gave up any attempt of following his reasoning. "You know a deal of secrets, Herr Klosterheim." He was almost apologetic. "I am no longer omniscient." His eyes seemed to look back at a time when he had command of millions. He began to speak of a life which perhaps he had dreamed, when he was Hell's captain and had led an army against Satan himself, a great rebellion, an attempt to achieve a further revolution. Now he was condemned, he said, to perpetual exile and eternal doubt. He, like Lucifer before him, had failed and been cast out, but his punishment had never properly been revealed to him. He had devoted himself to what he termed the triumph of man, and waited for the day when he might again challenge both God and Lucifer. The man's ravings were so grandiose and his tone so matter-of-fact that I could do nothing but listen in silence. The alliance he proposed would, had I believed in such things, commit my soul to immediate damnation. He was mighty convincing, however, for a madman. I agreed with whatever seemed politic, and set my lips closed on anything which might alarm him. At length he subsided. "I have kept you late, sir, but the meeting has proved rewarding to me. I'll guide you back to the surface." He led me back through the catacombs to the outer world, still speaking somewhat repetitiously in the manner of a man who has received a great blow to his spirits, in the death, for instance, of some beloved relative. His voice soon blended with the other noises in the tunnels. Then he stood with me in a narrow doorway, and I looked in apparent bemusement at the white dawn sky. I yawned. "You're tired, sir," said he. "A little, sir." He nodded his head slowly, his brow slightly furrowed as if he understood intellectually, but had no memory of a time when he himself needed sleep. "I'll send a message when I hear your ship is ready," he said, and then with the air of a wondering child he pointed at a tiny swirl of snow which blew from a nearby roof. He held out his finger and with an introspective narrowing of his eyes waited until a flake settled at last on the tip. He sighed, but his breath did not materialize as mine did. I first thought he intended to make some remark, and then I realized he merely wanted me to look at what seemed strange to him, the snowflake. "It is winter," he said dreamily. "Of course." But the snowflake did not melt. Coatless and shivering, I bid him farewell. I ran through the streets until at last I found the Mlodotto Bridge. I looked for Monsorbier down on the old wool quay. He was not there. It was only an hour past sunrise, and it was conventional for one adversary to wait another for at least that long. The paving stones of the wool quay had a light covering of snow. No one had been there since the previous night. Puzzled, I ran on until I was at last banging gratefully upon the tradesman's door of the martyred priest. I was admitted by Frau Schuster, who gave a multi gulp of relief and took me immediately into her plump and comforting arms.